Thank you, Paula, and thank you for coming out this evening. Many friends have showed up, which is nice, and I see just a few new faces, which is also nice. It's a pleasure to be here as a speaker this evening, rather than my usual role as the person introducing the speakers, which has its benefits. Being someone who attends most, if nearly all, of the Thursday evening lectures, I get the opportunity to hear very gifted speakers give very interesting presentations from a whole different range of perspectives, traditions, backgrounds. And you would think that hearing all these wonderful speakers would make me want to give more talks. But that is not the case. As I've told people who aspire to write books, I've written a book, just one. But I know from that experience that if you want to write a book about a particular topic, don't go to the bookshops and the libraries to see what other books there are, because when you see how many books have already been written about anything and everything, you've got nothing left to say. It's all been said. And the same with giving a public lecture such as this. Over the past few weeks in particular, we've been fortunate here to have some very good speakers who have spoken on topics related to what I'm going to speak about this evening, and that is the importance of cultivating silence and stillness in order to be able to arrive at deeper understandings. And we had Pablo Sender gave a whole talk on this. And Rabbi Rami, he was here, Rami Shapiro, and he was very gifted and very good at expounding on the importance of silence and stillness. Now, when I proposed this talk, I didn't know that these other people were going to talk on this similar topics. So, as it happens, they've said everything that I was planning to say. And I have to be very resourceful this evening. I would like to say that I've come up with some brilliant and new ideas and discovered great, insightful truths that I did not know before. That is not true. Unfortunately, much of what I will say this evening is probably repeating general themes that I myself have spoken on previous occasions, and as I've already said, other people also speak on. These general themes are true, valuable pointers, and each presenter tries to give it some life by reflecting on the theme in a way that is relevant to himself, herself, and hopefully to the people who are listening. This month, the month of May, is important in my tradition. I was a Buddhist monk. I'm no longer a Buddhist monk, but I am a Buddhist. And in the Theravada tradition, and the full moon of May is a very important occasion for the Buddhist community all around the world, in particular in the Theravada tradition. It commemorates the birth of the Buddha, the enlightenment of the Buddha, and the final passing away of the Buddha. Those three, rather important events supposedly occurred on the full moon of May. He was born on the full moon of May. 35 years later, he became enlightened, and Another 45 years later, he passed away at the age of 80. And so the full moon of May is probably the biggest occasion in any Buddhist country. It's Christmas and Easter and everything all wrapped in one. So it's not only a big holiday, a big event, but it is something that has great significance in terms of reminding people of that tradition of the importance of what the Buddha did. And of course, this talk is not so much about the Buddha, wasn't intended to be, but it comes from that tradition. And during this month of May, I've been fortunate to be involved with quite a number of different Buddhist groups and have been invited to speak. And so I find those opportunities both inspiring, but also opportunities that encourage me to recollect and reflect on the great significance of the Buddha and what he did and his teaching. And it's played a very big part in my life. Now, what inspires me most about the Buddha and his teaching is that he put the human being center and right in the center of what the spiritual life is about, and forefront in importance, foremost rather in importance with regards arriving at deep understanding regarding one's nature and attaining liberation. The Buddha, unlike maybe in other traditions, was not so concerned with just philosophical explanations, although he taught for many years and many discourses. And he explained things using logic and reason to try and encourage and convince people to try it, try to verify what he was pointing at. That was the gist of his effort, was to encourage people to try and verify what he was pointing at. He did not rely on belief so much. He did not encourage it, nor that he, on the other hand, he did not rely completely on the efficacy of reason or thought. He made it quite clear that the intellect can only reach so far, thought can only reach so far, reason can only reach so far. It never reaches to truth. And so he used these tools in order to encourage people, who have an interest in discovery, an interest in questioning the human condition and why are we here? And more basic than that is, how do we achieve this inner thirst, this drive to this quest for happiness, which is present in every living being, in every human being. And it implies, of course, that because we have this thirst and this drive and this deep yearning for happiness, I mean, that does imply something that we haven't got. we don't actually have it yet. Otherwise, we wouldn't be feeling this motivation or this drive or this yearning. And it does puzzle me when people feel they feel a little affronted when they hear the Buddha say things like the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering. As if it's like, well, it's grating, it's not pleasing to us. And yet, we live our lives, all of us, every single human being that I've encountered recently, is living proof that they're not happy, because every single living human being is still striving for happiness. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't experience happiness in the sense of there are happy times, sad times, joyful times, unpleasant times, pleasant times, miserable times. I mean, I don't mean that sort of thing, but we are living proof that there is still a sense of dissatisfaction, because every human being is striving to get it, to acquire that sense of fulfillment, that sense of completion, that sense of being truly not lacking in anything at all, not needing anything at all, not missing anything at all. So, for me, it's a no-brainer that we are living proof of what the Buddha pointed out, that, life is, there is suffering. And we're trying to find happiness. Now, of course, the Buddha, wasn't a pessimist or just a kind of a wet blanket. He just pointed this out as a way of saying, stop and look at yourself, at your life, at what you're experiencing, the human condition. What is it like? That's all he wanted us to do, to stop, look at this human condition. What are we experiencing? And this requires an ability to actually reflect on what one is experiencing. And we have that capacity, and we can cultivate that capacity so it becomes much better developed. And cultivating this capacity of self-awareness, the capacity to reflect on experience in order to arrive at understanding, is the purpose of meditation in its broadest sense. Every aspect of meditation is trying to cultivate, is trying to bring into being, and making it easier for us to abide in this reflective state of mind, which allows us to see the nature of our experiences. Now, this is not, it's not a thing that's going to happen all by itself. It is something that has to be brought into being. We have to consciously make an effort to cultivate this quality, because the power of habit and conditioning, as human beings, we've come a long way in that we have, we're not completely operating on instincts, and that's what distinguishes us from, a squirrel or a rabbit or a deer, the animal kingdom, is that we do have a capacity to, consider whether or not to act on certain impulses and instincts, and maybe decide not to based on some other considerations, such as long-term planning, such as recognizing the consequences that may come from an action that is not so obvious, but maybe it's the consequence that may manifest later on. So we can, we've developed this capacity of restraining our instinctual drives so as to facilitate a greater degree of well-being. But now we need to go a step further and really start to understand not only the instinctual drive, but the conditioning of the mind and the process of that conditioning in terms of what we are generating within ourselves, in our minds, through the power of thought, the power of memory, the power of projection, in that we can generate a variety of mental states that are either helpful to well-being or detrimental to well-being. And I use the term well-being physically, mentally, spiritually, for oneself and for others. To be able to do this requires that we have to have a higher degree of self-awareness that can actually notice what we are generating, what we are experiencing, what we are thinking, what we are feeling, what our moods are, what we're dwelling on, what we are creating in the mind. And also noticing it, reflecting on it, not just as, oh, noticing what is the quality of that? What does it do? What does it do to us? What's the consequence of allowing this to continue? What comes forth from it? What does it bring into the world? And so this quality of reflection at this level requires that we have to be able to sustain, maintain and sustain that knowing quality that is mindfulness. Mind is reflective and is capable of knowing the contents of the mental states. Now this is, how would you know that? How would you know the difference? Well, it's like, there are two qualities that make it easier for us to appreciate. One is silence, the other one is space. And this is when I talk about cultivating mindfulness. I often say, well, I try to generate a little more silence in my mind. I try to, live with more silence and more space in my mind. And it's just a terminology, that's all. But it's a good pointer because, like, if you look at this room, there are many objects, and we notice the objects, and we can be very engaged with the objects, and we can identify with the objects, and we can react to the objects, and we can like and dislike, and we can make a great big fuss and a great big deal about the object. So this one is like that, and I don't like. This one's like this, and I don't like, and it's not right, and it's not good. Objects, they draw our attention, and we engage and identify with, and chase or fight, but the space that allows for the objects, we never notice. It's like we just don't. We just don't turn our attention to it, and our attention doesn't recognize space because we're focusing so much on the objects, and we are engaging in the object, and the way we engage in the object, it doesn't allow for much reflection. It doesn't allow for much understanding because it's just always engaging with this identification, liking, not liking. If you look at, say, in this sense, the space, then the objects just exist in the space, and if the space is the prominent observation or the prominent area of attention, then the objects lose their significance greatly. And their quality of, being you like it or don't like it, diminishes. And the power of the object to draw you into a reaction diminishes. So, because you have now a contrast, there is space, the object comes and goes. When all of us leave this room, the space is still here. And when all of us are in the room, the space is still here. Actually, everything exists in the space. So now, if you think of this in terms of the mind, and again, let me go on with the idea of silence is another one that, like all the sounds that you hear, all the different sounds, and some of, right now, there are very few sounds that you hear. So in actual fact, you can hear more silence. Because sounds are only audible because there's a background of silence. If it's just sounds, you won't be able to really hear. And so now space and sound, or space and silence, allow us an ability to reflect on objects, if you wish, or thoughts. The physical objects, visual, and in the mind, or say in the physical world, sounds is, sounds that come and go, in contrast to the silence. In the mind, it's very similar. If we turn our attention, if we're able to turn our attention and start to notice the space between the mental activity, the mental creations, the thinking about the past or the future, or the various views and opinions, the various thoughts, the various beliefs that, are present in the mind at times. And I say at times, and it's very important, because nothing is present all the time. So with a little space and silence in the mind, consciousness becomes more reflective. Mindfulness, the quality of awareness that allows us to actually see the arising and the passing away of the various mental states, of the various thoughts, of the various beliefs, the various views, the various likes and dislikes. Everything, the whole gamut of the possible mental activity can be seen arising and passing away. Now, without that silence and the capacity to actually hear silence and turn to silence, and without the ability to attend to space and notice the space, all you have is the clutter. Your attention is completely drawn into, sucked into, and you're completely identifying with whatever it comes into consciousness. And so we identify so strongly with our moods and our emotions and our beliefs and our views and our thoughts and everything else that the mind generates. And we identify with these, so we, when it's a happy mood, we're happy. When it's a sad mood, we're sad. When it's an angry thought, we're angry. When it's a lustful thought, we're lustful. When it's a confused thought, we're confused. When it's an inspired thought, we're inspired. And when it's a depressed thought, we're depressed. And so we are just, we're just kind of up and down and being blown about, and we flow and are being swept by the currents of the various mental tendencies, mental states, that in themselves are just a result of conditioning. That's all. It's just a result of conditioning. So it's the old conditioning, whether it's conditioning from your environmental situations that you've been brought up in, whether it's conditioning that's genetically brought about, or whether it's karmic conditioning, especially if you're inclined to believe, or at least be open to the possibility that you don't come into this life with an empty basket. You've actually got quite a lot of stuff. that you know, inherited, in not genetically, but not from the environment, but karmically. And so that's baggage. And so this baggage, the conditioning continues to bring about this experiences. And every experience is conditioned. Everything about you and me is conditioned. There is absolutely nothing about you that you could say is unique or personal. Don't take it personally. Don't take it so personally. Isn't that amazing? We take this body so personally. My body, my feelings, my belief, my thoughts, my view. It's just, you know, it's really personal. Now, the Buddha did not dismiss the importance of the individual. You know, he did not dismiss that. He just said it's not such a personal thing. It's, you know, it's a process. It's actually something that's a conditioned process that's quite understandable. You can understand this process, and you do not have to be a slave to it, and you do not have to be trapped in it, and you do not have to be just swept along by the conditioning. Now, this ability to awaken, if you wish, the word Buddha is a wonderful word. It means awakened one, or the enlightened one. And, you know, each of us has that potential to awaken. And it's, you know, obviously a wonderful thing to aspire to. But our awakening has to start with little awakenings. And the little awakenings are this very process of inclining towards the reflective mind rather than the clinging mind, rather than the attaching mind, the reactive mind, the habitual mind, the mind that just identifies with everything that comes into being and clings to by either grasping, wanting to keep, or aversion, wanting to get rid of, or just becoming confused and overwhelmed by it. But there's always this sense of identity. So how do we create space and silence that will allow us actually to see, you know, you can actually witness the arising and the cessation, or the arising and the passing away of a feeling. All of us have, but we don't notice it very clearly. The arising and passing away of a mood, the arising and the passing away of a mental state, the arising and the passing away of a particular view, the arising and the passing away of a particular belief. I mean, I don't think there is anyone here who has not observed, at least at a superficial level, that you don't actually believe quite the same things that you used to maybe 10 years ago. You may not think quite the same things you used to think 10 years ago. Your views may have changed considerably about many things. About life, about other people, about politics, about the economy. You know, maybe when you were young, you know, when I was 20, I never thought anything about retirement. We were just talking about retirement. I mean, I never thought about it. It didn't exist in my mind. I mean, who's going to think about retirement? You're 20. Old age. Did you ever, you know, was that a concern for you when you were 20? old age? There's no 20-year-old here, though, whom I can ask. So it's a concern for all of us. But, so, our ideas and our thoughts change very quickly. And some of, beliefs also change. And we can, we may not have observed the arising and the passing of these things, but in retrospect, we're not the same person we were, and we don't think the same way we used to. We're actually, wow, all those things I used to feel so strongly about, so committed to, it doesn't seem to matter so much anymore. What's happened? Change. What's changed? The belief, the view, the thinking, the creation of the mind. So something new is in its place. What is it? And so now it's important for us to not only do this in retrospect, long term, in this kind of, it doesn't have much impact if I say, oh, you don't believe the same thing as you did 10 years ago. And you say, yeah, I changed a bit. It's all right. Yeah, I used to be a pretty, well, no, let's not go there. We recognize and we say, yes, I've changed, but it's just saying like, yes, I mean, the body's, it's not quite the same as it was 20 years ago, but that's natural, getting on a bit. It's still, the clinging is there, it's my body. But this is requiring that we do this investigation or this reflection in a very immediate way, in a way that's, we are actually seeing this happening all the time within ourselves. It is only a flow. And if we can incline towards stillness and silence, we'll see the arising and the passing away, in particular of the mental states. But of course, the physical, the Buddha said, you'd be a lot better off thinking that your body is yours, because at least it's kind of relatively stable for a reasonable length of time. The changing process is slower. But thoughts and views and moods and mental states and beliefs and any of the constructs of the mind, they arise and they pass away so fast. It's foolish to identify with them as being either you or yours. And yet, it is because of this identification and this clinging too, that we have so many ups and downs, that we are blown about so much. The inability to have some refuge, if you wish, in stillness and silence, from which we can see the comings and goings, the various visitors that come through and past consciousness. And the nature of consciousness is associated with whatever is contained in it. I'm not setting up consciousness as something separate. The consciousness and perception and feeling, that you can't separate them. They're just, consciousness is colored by what's in it. But we can see the arising and the passing away of this, the arising and the passing away of our various creations. They are our creations to the extent that they are the result of conditioning that we are subject to. If we can learn to abide in this stillness and silence a little more deeply and comfortably, and a little longer, a little more continuous, it will give us so much extra sense of well-being, because it is peaceful. It doesn't go up and down so much. It is a peaceful state. It doesn't have any qualities that make it either exciting or frightening or displeasing. Objects, just like I was talking about space, objects are the things that, will pull you with desire and aversion. The space is kind of neutral, and it doesn't do much. Now, this is not an exact comparison, but the same with silence in the mind. This, if you're able to turn and start hearing the stillness, the silence in your own mind. I mean, it doesn't have any extraordinary quality. It's not like, it's kind of neutral. It's nothing that you would find, it's so exciting or so pleasant, but it's extremely restful and peaceful. Extremely restful and peaceful. So it's a good place to be. It's a good place to be. So that then we see the comings and the goings of the visitors that come through consciousness. Now, meditation, whatever method one is using, is an effort to familiarize ourselves with this stillness and silence and be able to turn to it more easily, and then to be able to abide in it for longer periods, to the extent that we can turn to it at any time, to the extent that, in actual fact, maybe the silence is always there. Even when there is the comings and the goings, just like the space is always there, and you can notice space. It's not that you destroy and eliminate all objects in existence. I want to notice and see and experience space. I've got to annihilate the. For me to notice the space in this room, you'll have to leave. You're interrupting my space contemplation. It's not necessary to get rid of, but it's not necessary to keep either. I mean, if you go, the space is still here. If you're here, the space is still here. And the same with silence. For me to have silence, to be able to turn to silence, I don't have to destroy anything. It's there. And things arise and pass away. Thoughts arise and pass away. And the silence is something that is like a background. There's a very good friend of mine, and my teacher was Venerable Ajahn Chah, and he's the first Western monk who trained under him was Venerable Ajahn Sumedho. So he was the first Westerner who went to study with Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Sumedho is American. He's still alive. And I went to live with Ajahn Chah. The first time I went to visit, I met Ajahn Sumedho, and I was so inspired by him. He'd already been there 5 years. So he was considerably older than I was too. He was 36 at that time. Doesn't seem very old, but I was 23, so he was an old man. So he was like a big brother, and he was like a mentor, and very wise and very good monk, very good teacher. And he made his main practice, and he to this day, he repeats the same teaching, and this is turning to silence, listening to the sound of silence, which is like sometimes you can hear like a high pitch, when it's not in your ears. It's what's in your ears is a different thing. But it's not the sound in your ears. It's just I don't know. Adam Sumedo attributes many things to it. I'm not going to comment on that. But he uses that as his point of reference, and from that, he's able to turn to that and resonate with that, and whatever arises is just simply sankhara, that which arises and it passes away. It's not me, it's not mine. There is no need to cling to or to fight. There's no need to repress, there's no need to suppress, there's no need to indulge it. And it's just seen as an object that arises and passes away. And there is this tremendous sense of equanimity and freedom within him, that he can live wherever he goes. So, this ability to hear and turn to this silence, he does that actually as a meditation practice. That's his meditation. If he goes to meditate, he turns to silence and abides in silence comfortably. Now, for many meditators, that's very difficult to do at the start, because the inclination is to, again, it's difficult for us not to notice the people in the room and notice the space. The inclination is to go to that's the objects. And the same in the mind. The inclination is to get caught in the thinking process. And the more compelling the thinking, the thoughts are, or the mood, the more we get caught in it. And so I often call this the jungle of thoughts. The mind is like a jungle, and in a jungle it's difficult to have it much clearing. And so other meditation approaches are very useful, such as mindfulness of breathing, where we train ourselves to incline towards something which is very natural, but very simple, and it's not a thought, so that it's something that takes us out. The practice of mindfulness of breathing is to take us out of the jungle of thoughts and begin to just be with the sense of touch of the breath flowing in and flowing out. And as we do that, we can actually notice that there is more space in the mind and more silence in the mind, because the noise and the clutter of the mind is all that we generate through the power of thought, memory, and mental formations, perceptions, and imagination, reasoning. All that's the power to generate and create mental stuff. And if we can train ourselves to incline towards simplicity, the simplicity of experiencing one breath at a time, in a relaxed, attentive way, then gradually the jungle thins out. Silence becomes more present. Spaciousness in the mind becomes, you notice it, you actually feel it and you experience it. And within that, it's easier to start to notice how things come and go in consciousness, how things arise and pass away. And this is what leads to what I call understanding, insights. What is an insight? It's when you see something clearly enough that it frees you from its power. That it frees you, to some extent anyway, from the power that object has. When we see our moods, how they arise and pass away, when we see our thoughts and our beliefs and our views and all that which is conceptual, when we see it arising and passing away, and we see it with clarity, and we see it with an immediacy of present moment awareness, it takes something out of its value. It's no longer what it was. Its power to enslave us or for us to identify with it diminishes. We start to loosen that grip. We start to have more, just more freedom in our mind as to what we will dwell on, how we will dwell, what we will follow, what we won't follow, what we choose to act on, what we choose not to act on, how we want to generate going forward instead of just being swept by the current. Nothing changes more quickly than what the mind creates. However, sometimes what the mind creates becomes a chronic habit, and we create it over and over. And so people will say, "Well, I don't know. My belief is it's not. No, it doesn't change." Or no, I don't know. I always feel like that. Well, it just means that it does arise and pass away, but we keep on generating it over and over again. It's the being swept by the current, so it has more and more life, but it's not constant. It's impossible for it to be constant. There is no one who is always angry. There is no one who is always. Even a depressed person isn't depressed all the time. I mean, there can be chronic conditions, but it's just the habit is so strong. The conditioning is so strong. It's very difficult to get out of the current. When it's so bad, the conditioning is so powerful, it's usually, it's not possible to practice meditation. It's, the idea of mindfulness dealing with this problem is probably not going to work because there is just not enough, you can't generate enough space there, enough silence to allow for reflection, to allow for some distance. You're just completely identified with and swept along by. So when it's that bad, you probably, or all of us at times, may need some other assistance. But in normal, what we call normal existence, things do change. So question this: how fickle thoughts are, how fickle our ideas are, and the person who, yes, starting, that's it. From now on, I'm not going to smoke anymore. That's it. Give it up. I don't smoke, so it's easy for me. I've never had to do that, actually, so I don't know. It's supposed to be very difficult. But then the person who gives up the smoking is not the person who, a little time later, wants to smoke. It's a different person. It's a different thought. No, it's not that bad. It's a completely different thought process. Now it seems reasonable to smoke. Before, it was reasonable to give up smoking. Now it seems all right. It's not that bad. And of course, we believe it because that's what's in the mind now. And then maybe a few days later, and you're coughing and hacking, and you think, from now on, I'm not going to, it changes again. And that's because when we identify with thoughts, we are always changing because the thoughts are changing. Our likes are changing, our views are changing. So if we identify with that which is changing, we're always up and down, and being pushed around. So the need to be able to actually pull back, and in silence we can, oh, that's, yes, that's a thought. Now, the thought itself need not be either good or bad. The question is, how do you understand that thought? If you understand it as an impermanent condition, that's not going to have the power over you that will drive you to whatever creation or generation or of action. That's not going to be the primary thing. It'll be in a context. It'll be able to be seen in a context, and the context is, from that silence, there's also the accumulation of your understanding from previous observations, from previous reflections, so that you actually become not just older, but wiser. I mean, that's the whole thing about becoming wiser, is that you've seen enough to have some better understanding. So as we see more of the arisings and ceasings of moods and ideas and views and opinions and beliefs, and we really see the impermanence of them, and therefore the non-self nature of them, we can release. And it won't be what drives us. What drives us can come from a place of understanding that's been accumulated, or wisdom that's been accumulated, so that we make choices that comes from wisdom. Now, to do this, it takes time, it takes practice. And the practice of meditation is not just a little bit of meditation. It does require having the supportive conditions. One of the supportive conditions is having kind of a somewhat peaceful lifestyle, somewhat untangled lifestyle. And I don't mean lifestyle in, maybe that's the wrong word. I mean, lifestyle is, what is the condition of you physically living in your life? Is there space in your life? Is there time for some silence and stillness? Is there a little time for you to withdraw from the busyness of your life, the complexity of life? Is there an opportunity to be more reflective, more contemplative? Or are we just on the fast lane to, not necessarily, I was going to say on the fast lane to hell. That's not a very good, no, on the fast lane to the apocalypse. And the apocalypse is like, it's just kind of chaotic, that's all. The fast lane, chaotic living. And that doesn't mean bad living, it's just, it's kind of chaotic. It's just really preoccupied, busy, with so much being thrown at us and being required of us and being, burdening us, that we're completely entangled. Now, if that's our life, it's difficult. It's difficult to do something like meditation. It's difficult to find a bit of space in your mind if you've got no space in your life. And so, physically we make choices. I'm not judging anybody. I'm certainly not an example for anybody. But I do appreciate having a bit of space and some degree of simplicity. And I consciously don't entangle myself in a lot of things. I mean, enough to keep me entertained and kind of comfortable and busy. But I don't like it when my life gets entangled with busyness. Then, I feel that it's burdensome and it's detrimental to physically, I feel it. And mentally, it's very obvious. So it's choices. How much do you want to withdraw a little bit from the hecticness of what this world has going on at present? Maybe it would be a good idea certainly if you want to take the next step, which is to establish somewhat of a regular practice of meditation. And that establishing a regular practice of meditation is kind of, again, it's kind of requirement if you want to be able to have a reflective mind that can take refuge in silence, stillness, and spaciousness, so that it can reflect and begin to free itself from just the conditioned process of reacting and identifying and being blown about by the worldly winds. The worldly winds, they always said that the 8 worldly winds, praise and blame, praise and blame, gain and loss, fame and disrepute, success and failure, and you could make pairs of them. It's an endless, because existence, the worldly winds is existence. Because it's the experiences of life are always the duality, the polarity, the opposites, and there will always be the polarity and the opposites in existence, because that's what existence is. And if we want to be able to free ourselves from the winds, in other words, being blown about by the ups and downs and the polarities of experience and existence, we have to be able to turn to that stillness and silence that allows us to reflect, allows us to disengage through understanding, not through repression, and not through fear, and not through clinging.
It's not really a question, but I'm glad you spent time expounding on the concept of space in between objects. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was here, Tim Boyd was talking, and it was a very small, he just sort of introduced that topic in a bigger talk about something else. And it just happened to be the very next night, I was up in Wisconsin in the woods in a cabin, and there was a lightning storm that was going on in the middle of the night. No thunder, no rain, so it was perfectly silent, but there was this flashing lightning. So I went outside onto the porch to watch this storm, and it was like an exclamation point of what you're talking about, of noticing the space between, because as the lightning was striking, it wasn't lighting up that tree, it was lighting up the space between me and that tree, me and that pine tree, me and that bear, for all I know, because it was dark. But it was, I think I've been trying to replicate that ever since, because it was so profoundly the space between, and I got it, So I'm really glad that you talked more about that tonight, because it really helps to understand how to maybe attain that again.
Good. Thank you.
So over the last year and a half, I've come across a lot of people that are scared of silence and space. Whether it's being in silence or whether it's themselves being silent, is that they find the idea of being silent for a number of hours, just the first reaction is, I couldn't do that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the fear is not so much in those cases. What I'm suspecting, that it's not so much the fear of the silence, but it's the fear of hearing, having to live with what their mind is generating. Because if they could really be with silence, if they could be with silence comfortably, it would be quite a pleasant time for them. But usually people don't like to be alone in an empty, with nothing to do, because it's well, they're possessed. The spirits, the ghosts, the mind starts, it's uncomfortable. It starts all sorts of, even though they say, I don't like silence, what actually is, I don't like this, I don't feel comfortable, there is that process in the mind is what's making it uncomfortable. And sometimes the actual thoughts that come are to do with, things that you don't really like that much about yourself or about your life or about others. They're not comfortable with themselves, and therefore they can't be comfortable with being in that space. They're not comfortable with silence because they're not comfortable with themselves. There's something there that's generating discomfort or turmoil. That they used in, I don't know whether they still do, I think they're more aggressive these days. Hopefully I don't have to ever find out. But, when I was in the movies, when they captured somebody and this in the war, and they put him in solitary confinement as a punishment. And you think about that as being in solitary confinement. If it's, really nasty physical conditions, it's oppressive, of course. But if it's a comfortable situation, like when I went to school, it wasn't a very nice school. It was a different time. Physical punishment was a regular thing. All the teachers had their straps, a big leather strap that they would use. But one of the punishments was to put a student in an empty room and close the door and leave him in there. And that was it was kind of not pleasant. It wasn't something you'd rather get a strap than, be strapped on the arm or the hand rather than going into that room. Because when you think about it, like I lived as a monk, because I thought of this when I became a monk, because I spent hours and hours, days sometimes in my hut, in an empty hut. It's all right. I mean, why is it so unpleasant? Because, again, we're very uncomfortable with our mental environment. And because we're uncomfortable with it because we identify with it so much. And so I think that it's natural that most people are not comfortable or can't easily relax in silence. Even, most of us who've been meditating, if I say, okay, just relax and be in silence and stillness and just be peaceful. I mean, you want to be peaceful, don't you? Hey, you want to be peaceful, right? Just sit and relax, close your eyes, and just rest in silence. And most of us can do it a little, but it's obviously not really comfortable for us because very soon we're pulled away from it. Now, it's not like an aversion, but it's like the restlessness of the mind is still there. And so people who haven't meditated at all, the 5 hindrances, in Buddhism they call the 5 hindrances of either, this craving for sensory distraction or, ill will, aversion, or just dullness. But restlessness and remorse are very strong. this one hindrance, restlessness and remorse. When people start to be by themselves, restlessness and remorse really is a powerful, they call it a hindrance. It's something that prevents from resting. It stirs the mind up. So I'm not quite sure of the specific individual. I would say that the fear is more one of these hindrances that's just a conditioned and not able to withdraw from that conditioning. And so that will take quite a bit of practice. And it's like, we cherish these things so much. We cherish our thoughts and our mental creations.
So in the process of meditation, we achieve this restful state that is caused by our disengagement with the thoughts that come and go. How do we enjoy that state, but also feel the unity that we also crave, that feeling of connection with the bigger source or the something greater than us connection? How do we do that in the space and silence?
You see, that is a good question in the context of our culture and be it the Christian culture, theistic culture, Theosophical culture, because there is so much, this idea of the unity and union with the one. That is not, it's just not the approach that's within the Buddhist terminology. And that doesn't mean that one is more valid than the other, but if there is one, there has to be two. If there is one, there is two, because one has no meaning without two. I mean, one has no meaning without duality. And so, the idea that the one is, it's somehow or other setting up a duality in itself. In Buddhism, I mean, for us to come to a realization with regards the truth of the way things are, it will require experiencing deep silence, deep stillness, to the extent that the mind becomes increasing. It's just what I've spoken about this evening. It's quite simple, and it's beginning to reflect. And understanding arises. But this understanding, it frees us a little bit. I'm talking at a level which is, it's a little bit better than just looking back and saying, oh yes, we all get old. I remember when it's a little more impactful. But it's not impactful enough to break through the basic attachments and the basic ignorance. The mind has to become increasingly fit for the task of penetration. And that requires much deeper meditation. The mind has to be able to really experience a tremendous sharpness and clarity to see things as they are. And then this notion of one or separateness, it maybe doesn't apply. So I would just say that I would not talk about it in those terms, that's all. And I know this is not, Buddhism is often viewed as being kind of a downer. Everything about you know, sort of, because it doesn't emphasize the like in a positive sense. It's not posing, oh, the Godhead. It's not posing, something to become united with, or what it's posing is freedom from, and it's just freedom from the conditioned. That's all, just freedom from the conditioned. And it doesn't put something there. Freedom from the conditioned, and then I join and become one with the unconditioned, and the unconditioned and I live happily ever after. And I mean, it just doesn't. It's not a cohesive. It's just not the teaching in that manner. And actually, from the Buddhist point of view and the Buddhist frame of teachings, that just seems like childish, not childish in the same of inferior, or it's just not. It's not compatible with a reality, because you're setting up something that seems to be a contradiction. So, freedom is the goal. Freedom from the conditioned.
We have one question from the internet here. I don't know if you said this or not, but they ask, why is it better to sit in silence than to read the works of a master?
Because words will never give you truth. Words are just words and they're concepts. The Buddha never spoke the truth. He taught conventional pointers to something beyond the words. So you can, certainly that is valuable. I'm not dismissing it as not important. I mean, I think it's great to have guidance. But in order to realize the words are pointers, and to realize you have to know directly. So to study and to read and to reflect is good. But it will never give you wisdom. It will give you knowledge that it's just conceptual. It may be very useful information. But on the other hand, without that information, if you just sit in silence, will you become enlightened? Well, probably not if you're not pointed in the right direction. I mean, it's, we do say, that it's a tremendous blessing to have the guidance of teachers who have practiced and verified. And so that's why the Buddha is respected so much, because he discovered something and then he said, okay, you can do this too. This is how you go about doing it. Try this. But we can read his teachings as much as we want, but until we put it into practice, we're not going to know for ourselves. And this is one of the biggest distractions for religious people, I think. In the Buddhist communities in Thailand, there's a 97% Buddhist country, and there are about 200,000 monks in Thailand when I was there, and most of them study or just do rituals. And that's it. And very few actually practice. And my teacher, he'd hardly done any schooling. I mean, he'd been to school, but he wasn't a scholar. but he was very wise. And so we call it in Thailand they have the study monks and the practice monks. And the study monks are scholars. And they can explain everything to you. If you want to learn about everything, you go to see the scholar. If you want to learn about everything about the way the world evolved and how things came into being and what is and how it works, you read the books. Whether it's the Secret Doctrine or whether it's the Tripitaka of the Buddhists or the Bible of the Christians, or you read the books and then you go and listen to the scholars who will expound on it, and you will learn a lot, and that's good. But it's not wisdom, and it's not going to arrive at truth, and it's not going to arrive at freedom. It is only when one actually trains the mind to be able to see clearly and have direct insight into reality that one approaches truth, which cannot be a concept. It cannot be a thought. And everything that's in those books is thoughts. Thoughts that are expressed in words and become, the source of information. And the world is full of it. And what you can think one way, somebody else will think another way. And what you can think today one way, tomorrow you'll think it another way. And that's why, there is never an answer. There's never agreement. There's never agreement. So here we have the Buddha, enlightened, great teacher, great master, 45 years to formulate his teaching, expounded in great detail with clarity, establish a monastic order of monks with guidelines that enables that monastic community to last for millennia. And you would think, boy, that's a sure thing. All those monks are going to be enlightened. They're going to be harmonious community. They'll all agree on what the Buddha said. Because, he said it and they heard it and they lived it. And before the Buddha passed away, they were already arguing about things. And then, after the Buddha's passing and over the centuries, Buddhists disagree about everything. Not everything, not the core things, but, consciousness. How many consciousnesses are there? And is there? Now, everything is impermanent, so it arises and ceases. Okay, but is there a gap between when it ceases, is there a little gap before another arising starts? And what is in that little gap? And so now, maybe, okay, so there is birth and rebirth, but maybe there's something between. Maybe there's something between. And they argue about, and they not only argue, they formulate these tremendous philosophies, like Tibetan Book of the Dead is very popular among, there's a tremendous explanation of what happens between the birth, the death and the birth. It's just people generated. The Abhidhamma in the Theravada tradition that I'm part of is just all, this expounding in detail of the breaking up of every moment of consciousness and what constitutes it and how it, the different moments how many moments of this and how many moments. Proliferation. More proliferation. It's just, and then of course they disagree. It's exactly the same as our politics. It's no different. It's the politicians. Why is there no agreement? because they're all proliferating. They're all proliferating with great gusto, and they're all proliferating differently, and there's never an end to it. And it's good to withdraw from that. And it's good to withdraw from the proliferations of your own mind for a while. So, I feel that knowledge is valuable, information is valuable, but how much do you need? How much do you need to do the work?
I'm wondering, how do you maintain awareness while also being very relaxed and peaceful and still?
When you are mindful, you are at your best. You are the most relaxed. And I mean, to be mindful, actually, if it is mindfulness, this is the thing.
It goes into sleepiness sometimes. See,
yes.
where it very easily can go into sleep.
Yes. That is
Right.
that is one of the hindrances, that there is not enough energy and not enough interest, because space is it's not that interesting, and silence is not that, it's difficult for us to be engaged, and all we know is there's nothing here, I may as well go to sleep. There's no one here, who am I going to talk to? And so dullness is a common hindrance. Next to restlessness and remorse, dullness is the other one. But at least it's a pleasant one.
When people talk about going and experiencing the silence, it's often accompanied with the suggestion that there will be a joyousness, that you will find a very happiness. So if we're focusing on peacefulness and the silence, and I can connect to this, but so with the joy that comes with that, would that be something that the mind is then generating in some way, where it actually is almost like a fluid thought of something that doesn't have a form, but it still should be kind of passed out until we're just only in peacefulness without that happy, joyous thing that comes with it?
The mind that becomes increasingly peaceful and comfortable in stillness and silence is a blissful experience. It's the mind that is experiencing freedom, unburdened. It's like the feeling, the joy, or the joy that one does feel, is because the mind is no longer being oppressed. And the oppressions are the five hindrances that I speak about, or the things that keep blowing the mind one way or another. And the thinking process itself, it's hard work to keep thinking. I mean, I know we feel comfortable with it because we've been doing it all our lives, so we feel very comfortable working. And we don't like to stop working. But once we start experiencing the sense of relief, and we actually start feeling comfortable with silence, it's actually silence and stillness, or even with the breathing. I mean, I personally practice it with the breathing, mindful. You really feel like a weight has been taken off. It's just like you're carrying this load, and you're busily working, thinking about stuff, and then you let it go, and you feel relief. And it's very enjoyable to be light and free. So joy arises from just unburdening. And of course, if one can develop that further to deeper deeper states of meditation, one will start to realize that there is a happiness which far exceeds what we normally term as pleasurable experience from the sensory world. But at the very least, this evening I'm talking about a pretty accessible level of mindful state of mind or peaceful state of mind. Just for anyone who's even done a little meditation, you can notice the difference. You can, once you can incline towards that state, you can deepen it. But there is joy in being unburdened. There is joy in silence. There's a Zen master, and now I've forgotten, it was a long time ago I read these things, but he said, "Oh, what joy to know that there's no happiness in the world." And it's kind of, it's just a pointer. There is this sense of, you can call it joy or relief or freedom in unburdening, in freeing the mind from the oppressions that's due to the wrong understanding of experience.